Well, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you, my dear friend, Ed Hidalgo, Chief Innovation Officer at the Cajon Valley Union School District and champion of the World of Work initiative that you've been working on for, I don't know how many years now, 5 to 6 years?
Cheers. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, David Miyashiro, the superintendent, couldn't be with us. He got pulled away due to a personal matter, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but we're very happy to have you, Ed. And you had requested an open conversation. So those of you that have joined us, feel free to step in on mic and text chat, on video. And we will have a dialogue about a district-wide approach connecting literacy and career development.
Thank you, Dr. Lisa, and thank you to the team. Happy to be here, and definitely welcome any chats in the chat box. I've just come off some really wonderful visits in Indiana and Ohio to a number of different districts and speaking with legislators there about the integration of career development in schools. And so this is a timely conversation to be able to share some of the slides and experiences that we've been able to demonstrate out, and with many thanks to Dr. Lisa and her team at JI, and the place that a lot of this work really originated. So I'm going to keep us in a real mode. I know we're going to be at 30 to 45 minutes. We'll take questions on the way. Hopefully it's interesting. If anything pops up, let me know if you have questions. Let's go for it. Sound good, Dr. Lisa?
Sounds really good.
Okay, excellent. So I wanted to start today with this beautiful image that came from last week, Magnolia Elementary. This is the art teacher there at Magnolia Elementary. Her name is Saba. And she, this is such a perfect image because to me, it speaks to the integration of this work, because these beautiful wings were created by every student in one of our elementary schools, Title I elementary schools. And each one of the feathers of these wings represents a career that each of these students has identified as a hoped for future possible self. And when you zoom in to the feathers, which I did, and I looked at different quadrants and sequences, in one of the quadrants that I looked at, there were more than 40 different unique careers represented, 40 different unique professional careers, and only 10 total careers that were sports related. And what's so beautiful about that, I believe, is that in most cases, we would see lots of different career or fantasy career careers listed in these feathers, but instead they were these really hoped for possible career selves. Not that there's anything wrong with athletics or fantasy careers, but we know that moving away from those fantasy careers or the athletic only really shows a progression and understanding of self. I see Miss Jones has joined us. She's one of our teachers here at Lexington Elementary. It's great to see her. So I love this as an example of the type of work that's happening within our school districts to integrate this idea of possible selves, hope for possible selves for every child, every grade, every year. And so there's this beautiful quote that I'm just going to share, because some of you might be coming to this conversation thinking, well, why are we talking to kids about careers? And I love this, that, most scientists and applied professionals who concern themselves with vocational development continue to labor under the mistaken assumption that these processes, take place almost exclusively in adolescence or later. And the research evidence presented by Dr. Hartung and others, presents otherwise and shows otherwise. And I think that's part of our story, is that our work shows otherwise, that students starting in the early grades are interested in understanding their hoped for possible selves. They're making decisions early on in some cases, saying that's not for me, that's not for you, that's not for someone who looks like me. And so we want to dispel all of those wrong beliefs for kids. We want to help every child know there's a place in the world for them. And that work really wouldn't be possible without Dr. Miyashiro and the great work that he's been able to support us in doing here in Cajon Valley. And so we met almost 10 years ago. This was in a lab that I had created at Qualcomm. This is the lab. And he came up and he was really interested in this work. And we talked about the idea of engagement and student engagement, employee engagement, but we talked about happiness. We talked about how many employees in the world of work struggle, are not engaged in their work. We looked at some data like the Gallup student poll, which I imagine many of you are familiar with at this point, and how student engagement peaks, in 5th grade and bottoms out in 11th grade. And then he began to tell his story as a principal, his journey of taking over schools that were underperforming in LA. And the fact that, he was put in charge of schools that were going to be shut down. And when he thinks about the process, and when he talks about the process of taking over these underperforming schools, being a principal, and he talks about winning kind of the test score wars. And he even talked about it, hey, we won. Richmond principal David Miyashiro, today was the best day ever. They completely shifted their API mark. Their schools were increasing in the test score wars. And then he talks about a story of one of his teachers who came to his office crying one day after a student who had moved to Texas and had come back and had spent some time with this teacher and talked about coming back as a high school student and getting pregnant, and was involved in gangs, and she came to his office, David's office, the teacher did, and said, we haven't done a damn thing for these kids. We improved the test scores, but we didn't change their trajectory. We didn't change their path to a life of gainful employment. What are we doing? And so David talks a lot about, how the school system was designed, and this idea of the committee of 10, and, this traditional, the bell schedules, the sitting schedules, the routines, the process that you all know too well. And it was this work, really understanding the system that he'd been in for such a long time, for his entire career as an educator, and then coming to that lab at Qualcomm, learning about the world of work, really shifted his mindset. And so, here we are in Cajon Valley. He's a superintendent who's been in his role for 10 years. And he has an amazing board that's been supportive in shifting the way that the district has operated. And when we talk about shifting, one of the reasons that I wanted to come to Cajon Valley was because of, the fertile ground that would be this place that could bring in this idea of the world of work. And so how did that start? Well, I think what a lot of teachers would say, and Ms. Jones as well, and she might put things in the chat box, but this idea of bringing a blended learning environment, small group instruction and rotations, how powerful that has been to our district, and really driving a personalized model that includes technology, something that Dr. Lisa obviously is a huge part of really advancing, technology in our schools and using new applications and new systems. And all of our kiddos, every single 8th grader in our district has had their own Chromebook every single year. And Ms. Jones, being able to go into her classrooms and see what small group instruction, blended learning looks like has been really powerful. And so that exists here in Cajon Valley, this opportunity for every child to have access. And this has been part of the shift. At the same time, there's other aspects of Cajon Valley that really haven't changed. That poverty is still one of the highest in all the region. We have 42 districts in San Diego, and we're one of the highest poverty school districts in the region. Dr. Miyashiro dug a little bit deeper to understand this idea of zip code destiny and the fading American dream. How are we going to make this possible for every child, every grade, every year? How do we help every child be on a path to gainful employment? And then I remember when I connected Dr. Miyashiro to the San Diego Workforce Partnership, and he learned about the term opportunity youth. And when he got the data to better understand, well, where does El Cajon fall in this, graphic of opportunity youth? 16 to 24-year-old young people that are not in school and not working. As you can see here, we're 5th on the list. This data has changed a little bit because Vista is no longer number 1 on this list. And El Cajon has made some improvements as well, but still it's a constant struggle. And Dr. Miyashiro would say, every one of these kiddos came through our system. We've launched them out into the world unprepared for post-secondary, whatever that might be, whether it's apprentice, 2-year, 4-year, or other, they're not prepared. And so in his presentations, he talks a lot about the needs of young people. And there's one particular TED Talk from Logan the Plant that he shares quite often. And I'm going to share a couple clips here just real quickly.
What do you want to be when you grow up? Now, adults are hoping for answers like, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a neurosurgeon. You adults in your imaginations.
You adults in your imaginations. And Logan goes on to explain some of the more important things that he thinks should be resident in his experience as a student.
So it seems to me when adults say, what do you want to be when you grow up? They just assume that you'll automatically be happy and healthy. But maybe that's not the case. Go to school, go to college, get a job, get married, boom. Then you'll be happy, right? We don't seem to make learning how to be happy and healthy a priority in our schools. It's separate from schools. And for some kids, it doesn't exist at all.
And for some kids, it doesn't exist at all. When I think of some of the surveys of our students in Cajon Valley, two of the key elements that they bring forward is this idea of, I want someone to know my name, and I want someone to know what I do outside of school, to know me personally and well. That's something that our own students right here bring forward. So there's work that we need to do. Good news is that Logan has done, well for himself. He's out in the world. He's all grown up. But this idea of happiness, of engagement, still continues forward. And for Dr. Miyashiro, it took him to understanding how this idea of happiness is defined by some of the leading researchers, people like Sean Acor, for example.
The modern world, we'd find happiness as pleasure, which is very short-lived and then it's over, which is not worth us spending even 10 minutes talking about here today. What I want to talk about is what the ancient Greeks defined it as. They defined happiness as the joy you feel moving towards your potential. I want to stop momentarily because that definition actually changes the pursuit of happiness.
The joy that you feel moving towards your potential. When I think of this idea of possible selves, future possible selves, hope for possible selves, some of the work that Dr. Leese and the team at JI have helped us with along so many years, this is a shift for us in school. How do we help young people move towards their full potential? One potential might be their ability to be very successful at test scores and doing their grades in certain subject matters. But there's a whole realm of opportunity that exists to evaluate potential that lives outside of that space. How do we combine both of those, of course, is a big question. But when we think about, and when we know about, some of the longitudinal studies around happiness, relationships always at the core. So for Dr. Miyashiro, and this is a brief reflection on his journey to getting where we are today and helping advance this work in a school district with 28 schools and 17,000 students and 2,500 plus employees, which is a complex endeavor, really landing on this quote that there are two educations, one that should teach us how to live, how to make a living, and the other how to live. And so that's how our mission and vision statements came to be. And that's how our board decided to advance this work of developing happy kids, living in healthy relationships on a path to gainful employment. Without this language at the highest level, our work doesn't exist. There is no room for our work to exist because we can't articulate the why. So that's how we got there. If you're thinking, how do we shift things in our own school districts? That's how we shifted things. This idea of blending education in the world of work. Again, that path to gainful employment, what's the outcome? How to live and how to make a living. And in doing so, we saw the slide on zip code destiny earlier. Can we make Cajon Valley the best place to live, work, play, and raise a family? Is that possible on this journey? Can we accomplish more than just helping each child? Can we help the entire ecosystem? Can we shift the trajectory of our community? A community where young people sometimes don't leave their 5-mile radius, where many of our students have never seen the ocean. Many kiddos have never been in an elevator, where we have refugees coming. They've never even been to school before. They've only lived in refugee camps. They arrive here and they speak 4 languages, but none of those languages is English. So it's a dramatic challenge that we face. And I'm so thankful to educators like Ms. Jones, who's on the call with us today. And, you can ask her questions about what she's experienced at Lexington, but she's doing very important work there, as I'm sure many of you are as well. So as we think about and in kind of the title of our work and in the brief bio of the talk today, this shift now to integrating career development and literacy into our instructional core. I'll start by saying that it's not been an easy process. It's been a brand new language for teachers, and at the same time, it has paid some beautiful dividends. And I'll share some of those with you as we go. But for those of you who are lifelong educators and haven't integrated career development into your schools, you might be surprised to know that there's a bunch of beautiful research around career development that we use to frame the theory of change and the theory of action. I know some of you will want to go and read some of this, perhaps, but I spent a year working at University of San Diego with Dr. Lisa's team on this theory of change. And because of the scholarship that exists and because of the great mentorship and support from her team and others in business, we were able to form a theory of change that led to our career development framework. The one thing that I'll also say is that when Dr. Miyashiro went out to the community to ask business leaders and regional leaders, if they were running the schools, what would they do differently? And he asked that specifically of the city manager, who runs all of city operations except for the schools. Well, almost resoundingly across the entire community, they said, you guys need to stop stigmatizing labor. You are stigmatizing some of the most important jobs and careers in our community. It's often said that East County builds San Diego. The reason for that is because many of San Diego contractors, electrical, plumbing, masonry, construction trades, they live and have businesses in East County. Some of the biggest developers in our region live in East County. And they said, you are stigmatizing labor and you're graduating kids out that don't want to work. And so again, Dr. Miyashiro took that to heart, and that theme is deeply integrated into this conversation. So from what theory says, what research says, to what the community says, and what we're delivering out, the opportunity youth, et cetera, we design a career development framework for every child, every grade, every year. And I will say, not every teacher integrates. We don't have mandates. We educate, we share expectations, and we support teachers' genius and creativity to integrate in the classroom. Ms. Jones is one of those teachers, but there are others as well, many others, that are providing this for every child, every grade, every year. So this idea that every child should have the opportunity to learn about their strengths, interests, and values. Every child should have the opportunity to explore both academic and career, and every child should be able to tell their story, their unique story, not someone else's story. These are core elements of the framework. And at the center really is that idea of me and being literacy ready. And I'll share why that's so important in a little bit. And I already know that you know why it's important, but you might be surprised at some of the statistics if and when I get to that. But it's through the work with JI that we've been able to share out what does this even look like? And I highly recommend the exemplary teaching practices case study. Again, Ms. Jones was one of those teachers, and it's pretty amazing to hear teachers talk about in some cases, the renaissance in their own careers of integrating career development into their classrooms, and the power of being able to see their students through a new lens of potential. And I think in many ways it ties back to what Sean Acor had to say is, the joy that you feel moving towards your potential. Well, when you see a child through the lens of their strengths, interests, and values, you see their potential in a completely different way from what you see in the grade book, potentially. And I think that's been powerful for a lot of teachers. So I want to spend a little bit of time on, back to this idea of self-awareness, strengths, interests, and values, because I'd be remiss if I didn't share kind of the grounding framework of this component in particular, this idea of self-awareness. Because for us, without the RIASEC framework, we would be using perhaps a different grounding a model for understanding self, and it would probably be less effective, quite frankly, because if you're not familiar with the RIASEC, you should be. because this vocational typology is the most researched of all vocational typologies. This idea of our own interests and how they relate to the world and work environments and how they relate to us and how can we find that fit. And so in our school district, we teach young people how to begin to self-report, self-identify their Holland codes or their RIASEC letters. And it's not deterministic. We don't track them. We don't test them. We don't bake it in so that you only have one theme and that's your theme forever. It's fluid, it's dynamic. And this is where a lot of people struggle because they don't understand that dynamic nature of interest and how they do change over time. There is a period of time where they become more stable, but for a long time, they are in this malleable sense, moving and changing and shifting. And so we make it accessible for these interests to be discovered by young people. And what's particularly powerful and why we ground in interests is because the research tells us that interest fit has the highest correlations to career success, performance, and income of any of the personality measures. There's some deep research associated with Holland's model. In many cases, it's not understood the way that we are integrating it, however. In most cases, and in many of your schools, your counselors or someone deploys a test, an assessment, a career assessment, and that child's interests are baked in many cases. You give them the report, they walk away, and they're done. In our example, in our model, in our practice, it is the teachers who integrate this in the classroom, and it starts whenever possible, as early as kindergarten, and children begin to develop a language across their entire school career, all the way up to our high school. And so the idea is that every child, every grade, every year has the opportunity to experience each of these interest-themed letters, explore different careers across their journey, so that by the time they get to high school, there's a better chance that these students will have had the opportunities to know themselves, to have a better understanding of their options, and then potentially make more informed choices about CTE pathways, post-secondary pathways, et cetera. But it's different than what maybe some of your kiddos have experienced as they've matriculated into high school and are asked to make decisions without having a lot of coaching or practice on the front end. So this is why we ground in the framework, why we ground in RIASEC. It's paradoxical in that it's complex, but it's very simple. And if you ask, well, who else uses this, or how is this practical? How is the RIASEC practical? Well, you might be surprised to find out that Tallahassee Community College uses the RIASEC to inform their practice. And what's interesting is they were up for the Aspen Prize last year. They had reduced enrollments, turnover during COVID, and they're graduating more students of color. And they have a very specialized counseling unit that is working with incoming students related to their interest themes and aligning them to pathways. So that's very powerful, right? There's a community college that's using this language. You might find that universities like Ohio State, there's many of them. There's Missouri State uses it as well. You see me moving my image around, but there's many universities that classify their majors by the RIASEC. The government's database of jobs classifies more than 900 careers by the RIASEC. That's pretty useful. Our own priority sectors here in San Diego County, well, they use the RIASEC to organize career areas within our 7 priority sectors. And for us, our portraits of graduates includes this idea of the RIASEC, and our competency-based model includes this understanding, self-awareness, exploration, my story, the journey, and students are consistently identifying and building their interests on their interest walls. So it's a powerful language that's used ecosystem-wide across K to 12, but I would say K to gray because our teachers use it as well, and it's super powerful. So we're at 11:43. If there are any questions, I just want to reiterate, please do ask any questions. Dr. Lisa, if you have any questions for me, if there's any prompts, I'm happy to take questions.
I have a comment. Can you
Or
pull
comment.
up the career development slide again with the, I think it had the Mission of Me framework on it. You know, I finally reached a point because you talk about that, like it's not just getting kids ready for jobs, right? It's really about uncovering who they're going to be as future humans. well, who they are now, and then what they could possibly become. And it's almost like it's a life development framework, right?
Yes, definitely.
It's life development. It's about having a great life.
It is. Well, and
I don't know. Anyway, I just wanted to comment on that because I think it's overlaying an older, language on top of something new that you're trying to create.
Well, and what's interesting is that if you can see me in this is a great book by Gallup. It's called Well-Being, and Gallup studies well-being all around the world. So what's really cool is you can go to every country in here, and they have a map that talks about the well-being index. And what's interesting is that Gallup puts career number one on their well-beings. And
Right.
so, but because think about, like, people recover more quickly from the death of a spouse than from prolonged unemployment. There's some interesting studies about that. When you think of career and the role of career in our own identity, whether you think it's right or wrong, the reasons that people go to work and the effect that work has on our lives, our titles, our relatedness, self-determination, is it survival? Why do we go to work? But according to Gallup's research, in order to unlock these areas of social well-being, financial well-being, physical well-being, and community, that career piece is really important.
Right.
So imagine giving every child that opportunity to see their place in the world. Think of those opportunity youth. How many of those opportunity youth actually graduated 12th grade with a vision of their hoped for future possible selves? I think we probably know the answer. I mean, maybe not for all of them, but for many of them, right?
I was a fast food worker. That was it. That's all I knew by the time I graduated.
Right. So in a more complicated and an expensive world for young people, graduating in debt, et cetera, 1.7 trillion, yesterday I did an interpretation with a recent high school graduate and her freshman sister. And they're like, why don't they do this for us in school? And they go to pay to go to school kind of private school here in San Diego. And they're like, why don't they do this for us in school? Why am I just getting this now? And we did the interpretation of the strong interest inventory. So it's never too late, K to Gray. But I think to your point, Dr. Lisa, this is a lifespan process, and it is, I've got retirees here in the district. They're like, Mr. Hidalgo, I'm thinking about doing something different.
What am I going to do now?
What am I going to do next?
Right.
I had a quick question.
Sure.
Hi, first of all, congratulations on the work. It's pretty innovative. I was a teacher too and worked in communities as well that were similar. So definitely didn't see this work there. That's all I will say. I guess the work that I'm doing right now is consciousness and education. So I guess my two questions that come is, how do you balance between being fully present with kids and their needs in the moment versus getting them to think about the future? Because as we talked about a lot of times in schools, all we do is talk about the future, right? You're going to need to know this in third grade. You're going to need to know this for the test score and the SATs and the job in the future. But it kind of gets detached from the now. So I'm just interested on how you balance that messaging. And then my second question was, I saw that there was in the framework, the artistic column. And
yeah.
I guess my question is, how do you navigate the biases? As someone who's kind of creative herself, I think we get a lot of messaging that that's not a viable option for your future. Whether it's parents and teachers, I think we don't even realize we're doing it, but it's messaging we got, so it becomes kind of unconscious. So I'm interested those were two questions that I had.
I appreciate your comments, and we'll talk about that now in a second. I'll show some images and examples about that, but I just did an interpretation and the artistic on RISEC, on the Holland framework, is really about creative self-expression. So artistic is one of my themes. It's my third theme that I would claim on the RISEC model. I'm a social, enterprising, and artistic. And the way that it represents itself for me is that I like to build my own slides, and I like to tell my own story as much as I can. Please don't give me slides to speak from. I'd rather build my own. So that's my creative self-expression and my approach. And I love that. But the fine arts are also very much a part of that artistic theme. And I just did an interpretation with a high school senior who loves dance. And her dream is to have her own dance studio. And her parents were concerned about that. And so we had a long conversation about her interests, back to the research. high correlation career success, performance, and income of any of the personality measures. But when we look at strengths and values connected to that interest as well, what do you want for your child? And when we talked about well-being, they're like, yeah, that's what I want for my kid. Okay, well, do you want her to pursue a STEM career? Or do you want to pursue a path that might align most to her interests because you want her to have this in her life? And they took they sat back in their chair and like took the deep breath, and they're like, it was almost like weight off their shoulders. But you have to give this gift of knowledge to teachers because they don't understand this a lot of times.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So in our practice, we start with the adults. Every adult needs to go through this process first to understand it for themselves, because most of them have never had this before we can expect them to give this to their kids. And once that happens, then you see a lot of more people buy in. Some people are always going to push back, but a lot of more people do buy in. So to your second question, I think we're getting to a place where the now really makes a lot of sense. We talk about career development as a human process. And Dr. Martin always would talk about any assessment, no matter how good, is only as good as interpretation. That's kind of like the bigger picture, the interpretation when we're doing those. But career development's a human process. It's a relationship process. The relationship shouldn't be about the future. It should be, in all cases, it should be about being present and understanding, where are you today? And so the beauty of that comment, like a human process, understanding you today. This is Ms. Jones, who has just finished self-reporting with her students. The child originally identified as AIC, and the star shows that she's, based on the experience that Ms. Jones was providing in the classroom, this is probably a first grader, maybe first, second combo during COVID. The child's more identifying with artistic, conventional, and social. That's so present in the moment. That's in the now. I see you. Talk to me about that social theme. That wasn't present before when you self-reported, but it is today. What are you experiencing that brought that forward? Tell me about that. Like, it's so present, and not only with Ms. Jones and the child, but also students together as they understand each other's themes. They can build more complementary teams, heterogeneous groupings. It's such a powerful way to build teams in the classroom. And by the way, it mirrors the way business wants to build teams in the workplace, because homogeneous groupings aren't as beautifully wonderful as heterogeneous groupings, because we want all that diversity in play when we have project teams assembled. So hopefully that makes some sense. Right?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
So here's being perfectly present with this language, bringing it into the classroom. It's so possible selves. It's so meta thinking, but it's also so in the moment. So in the moment that in a small group rotation, we can be covering the social theme, right? It's so present in the moment that Ms. Smith can be opening up GLAD strategies with first graders around each theme so they can build the vocabulary, that then that first grader is up now, present, articulating her themes to her classmates. Why does she lead with artistic? Isn't that beautiful that we just talked about artistic, and there it is in person? And this was on Superhero Day. Okay, this isn't our dress code in Cajon Valley, but it should be. It's Superhero Day. And then, do you want to hear what children can actually say? This is so present. This is so present. It's a seesaw video, and I want you to hear the child's voice.
Hi, my bracelet code is ACS. I'm artistic when I paint, use my imagination, draw, and create things. I'm conventional when I learn, also because I like math and numbers, and when I sort things. I am social when I help and be kind. Thank you for watching. Bye.
When researchers come and see our work, they're like, well, I teach the RISEC to master's and PhD level students at Boston College, and I've never seen this before. Like, that's totally cool, because we've never seen it before either, but check out what students can say and do. So I love that I love that question about the present, because really this work done well. And by the way, we went and visited some classrooms in other states. I mentioned earlier, we saw a lot of work that happens in elective classrooms, pullouts. almost all the work that you'll see in Cajon Valley happens in the instructional core. I'm so proud of the teachers. The teachers are true. We use the hashtag teacher talent. They are the craftsmen. They are the artisans. Their work is so beautiful, so tremendous. When they have this language, then you see something like in the present, to your point, integration, right? Because in elementary, teachers are using anchor charts. But I can guarantee you that 100% of every single one of our teachers 5 years ago was not including the RIASEC in their anchor charts, but now they are. And so the veterinarian anchor chart in this, I'm guessing, first or second grade classroom, it's probably one of the careers on our grid, I know it is, now includes the investigative theme. Why does it include the investigative theme? Because veterinarians lead with investigative. They like to use math and science to solve problems. And now, even without the teacher talking about the RIASEC, students are making these natural connections, and it's building those metacognitive skills. Or maybe it's character analysis, like this novel, The Lawn Boy. Now you can start to ask questions in the present with students. What do we think are the RIASEC themes of the character and the main character in The Lawn Boy? And guess what? There isn't a right answer. It's really about students processing this understanding of self, understanding and processing the characters. And that's the conversation. Isn't that so? There's probably a word for it that Dr. Lisa will share. It's so present, but it's so building this meta skill for the future too. Like if I can see and the teacher might say,
Metacognitive reflection.
yeah, it's a
maybe?
metacognitive reflection, right? So, right. So now we ask the students, how are you similar or different than the character in The Lawn Boy? Well, I'm enterprising just like the Lawn Boy is because I like to sell and persuade. Beautiful. Now, are we disrupting class? Are we putting too much on teachers' shoulders to be able to do that? This is something they're already doing. So the beauty of it is, and I thank Dr. Lisa for this, and I'm sorry I didn't put the logo on, the JI logo on here. I'm sorry, but this is part of our research, our original research, but look at these 169 teachers, how their mindsets were shifted when they started to integrate this work. Now, number one, career development matters. 5 years ago, 100% had no idea what even career development is. That teacher should play a role, like 100%, 5 years ago, we're like, that's a counselor job, and then that wow improves my classroom experience up 27%. It's not easy to do. But when you do it, it really does change. It does change students' lives. And so again, whether it's, and this is from some of our research, whether it's integrated into ELA or whether, teachers are building heterogeneous groupings, it's powerful. And you can see like these are groups being formed with heterogeneous RIASEC themes. It's really powerful. And then ultimately it's like, well, what can students say? And we heard a first grader, and I'm going to stop soon. I know I got to stop. Are you just cutting off?
I'm going to have to end this session because I have to log
Right
into
now?
another one. It's going to log us all out,
So sad.
and I don't want to do that to you.
Well, that's all I got then. Stay
No,
tuned
you
for
don't.
more.
You
Stay
can
tuned for
go
more.
on for hours and hours. There's so much here. It's so deep. I just want to thank you for yourself, Ed, for all the great work, for your time today. If people want to get in touch with you, where do they follow up with you?
At Ed Hidalgo SD.
You
is a
cut
good
out
way.
for me. Say it one more time.
Well, at Ed Hidalgo SD is a great way to a great way to connect. On
Is that
Twitter.
on Twitter?
Yeah, if you want
Okay.
to DM, you can. It's a good way, or connect Hidalgo at cajonvalley.net. And I just popped in an article from the Hechinger report, which has some more of our information. If you want to grab that, whoever's here,
Awesome.
happy to help.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thanks for
much.
having me. Thanks for having me.
You're
Hi,
a
Dr.
blessing
Myers.
to us all.
It's a pleasure to see you all. Thank you. Hi,
All
Dr.
right.
as well.
Take care and have
Bye.
a great
Bye.
day. Thank
You
you
too.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You are awesome, and this was amazing.
Hi, Doc.
And I have loved watching it grow from like the very beginning. So it's been really such a joy.
My
really
pleasure.
amazing.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye.